Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to talk about Celtic music today. Now, this was a column that Rich Shader wrote in his publication Celtic Seasons. And you may look on the internet for Celtic Seasons, or you may email me, and I will be glad to give you the way to subscribe. It's not an expensive publication, and it's really interesting. I know you'd enjoy it if you had it. This one is about country music. A direct descendant of the traveling tent show was the early hillbilly string band and the musical groups that fell into a category. They were destined to make the 1920s and 30s known as the golden age of hillbilly music. Hillbilly records catered specifically to the rural southern whites of Appalachia and the Ozarks during the first few decades of the 20th century. Remember, early hillbilly music consisted of two traditions, that of the semi-professional string bands and minstrel singers, and that of the music created strictly in the home. It was this latter influence that helped to preserve many of the traditional Scottish and English ballads. The guitar, five-string banjo, and the fiddle were the most commonly used instruments in the early records, although mandolin, autoharp, and Hawaiian steel guitar were also occasionally employed. Two forms of hillbilly music evolved during the formative years of the recording industry: country and mountain. Country stressed individual singing, used more non-traditional instruments, and was influenced by both popular and Afro-American music. The mountain strain relied more on the traditional songs and tunes for its repertoire, and the material tended to be performed in the customary high nasal harmony style. Its sound was best characterized by the Carter family. Show repertoire included traditional Elizabethan ballads, gospel songs, cowboy ballads, railroad songs, hobo songs, topical songs, and sentimental parlor songs. Probably no aspect of country music is as close to its Celtic roots as bluegrass. Originally confined to the mountain areas of Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, and Kentucky, bluegrass has reached every corner of the country, with new bluegrass bands seemingly forming every day, and with bluegrass festivals attracting some of the most loyal and devoted fans anywhere. Bluegrass echoes death, tragic love, family, and religion. It enjoyed its peak of popularity in the 1950s. Urban professionals and political activists in the 1960s embraced it as the perfect example of authentic American music. Bluegrass reintroduced a reverence for ancient country styles, songs, and tunes. Bluegrass also resurrected the five-string banjo and dobro steel guitar and brought the fiddle back into the limelight of a time when other country musicians seemingly were abandoning it. Bluegrass has its roots in the mountain string band sound. Although it emerged in the 1940s around the same time as honky-tonk, bluegrass was everything that honky-tonk was not. Where honky-tonk was modern living, the rowdier the better, bluegrass looked inward, turning the clock back to a simpler time. Originally, bluegrass didn't have a name. The term simply referred to the music of one man, Bill Monroe, and to the three-finger banjo style of Earl Scruggs. Monroe's band was known as the Bluegrass Boys. William Smith Monroe was born near Rosine in central Kentucky, the eighth and final child of James Buchanan and Melissa Vandiver Monroe. His father owned a 600-acre farm, and his family of Scots heritage had been part of the Great Migration into Appalachia that began in the 18th century. So Bill, with his frontiersman background, bold, individualistic, and hardy, grew up in a tight-knit Kentucky community where neighbors knew one another and everybody seemed to be everybody's cousin. Because of poor eyesight, young Bill did not participate in typical outdoor boyhood pastimes. Some historians, in fact, believe that this physical impairment helped in the development of his musical ability. Like the Irish and Scottish harpers of old, many of whom were blind or had other physical ailments, such as Turlough O'Carolan, Monroe turned his handicap into an advantage and developed an acute sense of hearing. He had to learn by ear, for examples, the harmony parts in church music, and soon developed an impeccable knack of knowing what sounded right. Monroe's original compositions employ much of the mythical framework that is found in old Scottish and Irish ballads, an infectious melody, simple lyrics, well-structured narrative form, magical or vaguely supernatural events, and universal emotions. Bluegrass also has its roots in traditional psalm singing. Its link with Gaelic psalm and shape note singing are particularly strong. The singing is done in a tense, high-pitched style that often turns into a falsetto, and songs are frequently shouted and ornamented with rising and falling notes, as well as with grace notes. In theme alone, bluegrass evokes a particularly Celtic feeling in its tone, as if the singer is pining for some childhood dream of paradise. Excuse me. It is, says bluegrass historian Robert Cantwell, close to the religion and culture of the original Scots-Irish who began to settle in America in the early 18th century. He particularly points to an emotional link with Gaelic psalm singing and the Hebridean island of Harris and Lewis. Isn't this amazing? I'm not the only person to see this link. No less an authority than the Czech composer Anton Dvorak commented in 1895 that he found that the so-called plantation melodies of the South, with their unusual and subtle harmonies, bore a striking resemblance to the indigenous music of Scotland and Ireland. That's interesting to know, isn't it? We'll do it again next week, I hope. You all take care. Thank you. Bye.